Hello, hello. Welcome back to Peak Northwest, an outdoors and travel podcast by the Oregonian and Oregon Live, dedicated to the adventure and exploration of our beautiful Pacific Northwest. I'm Jamie Hale.
And I'm Chiara Profena. Together we take you to some of the most beautiful and interesting destinations in our region, discussing where to go, what to do, and places to see. And today, because it's been so hot lately, we're looking for some Portland area swimming holes to cool off.
You know, while Oregonians don't really have the benefit of swimming in the ocean, which, as we all know, is frigid even in the summer, we do have a ton of rivers and lakes and other spots that are perfect places to take a dip on a hot summer day. And Chiara, this is a topic I understand that you have a special interest in.
Yeah, I requested this topic because I love to hear and learn more about swimming holes. I grew up swimming every summer. I lived in Texas, so obviously it was 100 degrees every single day from, May through August. So I was always finding places to swim, just hanging out at the pools, and we don't have many pools around here, so swimming holes seem to be the best option, and I actually prefer them to pools. They're much more, natural and cozy and serene, so we wanted to bring in an expert today, correct?
That's right. Joining us today to talk all about local swimming holes is my good friend Hadley Brooks, who's also an avid swimmer and who has made it her business to discover, pretty much every good place to swim in the area, as I understand it. Hadley, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, guys. I definitely wouldn't call myself an expert, but I do like the water, so...
Well, Hadley, before we get into the swimming spot specifically, I do want to talk about safety. So this is an issue that comes up repeatedly every summer in Oregon, as our waterways here can be actively dangerous. So for folks who want to go swimming out in these natural environments, what should they know? What kind of precautions should people take?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. One, as someone who does a lot of swimming in rivers specifically, I would tell people to never underestimate a current. Even if it looks like the river is pretty chill, they can get pretty strong pretty quickly. And you can even get swept off your feet just kind of going in up to your waist. So especially with rivers, I always really take the current into consideration, wade in super slowly. If you have a nice pair of river shoes, wear those, you may get some more traction. But currents, definitely a big thing. If you're going to more of a swimming hole, you see people diving in, that can be super fun, but we definitely don't always know how deep these things are. So always make sure you go down to the water's edge. You're actually looking at how deep these places are, if there's any rocks, obstructions, anything like that before you ever consider jumping in. And then another thing is temperature. As we've been talking about, it's obviously been super hot the last couple of days, but most of the water is still incredibly cold. And even though it is rare, you can jump into very cold water and kind of get that cold water shock that often makes it hard for people to swim, even if they're very strong swimmers. So I always like to test the temperature of the water before I get in. And then also just make sure you actually know how to swim if you're getting in the water. If you don't know how to swim, I would definitely recommend probably not swimming, but you can still wade into some of these places. But just, go to the places that have more people. There are some areas that even have kind of lifeguards on duty. And then a lot of the state parks even provide now personal flotation devices at some of the trailheads to some of these spots that you're allowed to borrow and use. So that's always good to remember as well. No shame in using any of those.
All important good tips to keep in mind. And so as somebody who's been doing this for a while, having a sort of summer of swimming project, what made you want to get into this, or what got you interested in finding these places?
Yeah, I was kind of inspired by my brother actually many years ago. I love to swim and I love being outside in nature, in water. And he kind of came up with this thought that how oftentimes at the end of the summer, you realize I didn't really go swimming as much as I wish I had. And so he kind of set up this personal challenge to make sure he swam outside at least once every week throughout the summer. And I started doing it along with him with basically just the goal of actually making sure I do the thing that I love and want to do, because life can get in the way and I get busy or it's kind of inconvenient. But just kind of forcing myself to go is usually makes it so much more enjoyable. And it gets me outside, it gets me checking out new areas. So it's really just kind of like making sure I don't give myself any excuses to not be doing the thing that I love to do. And I've discovered a lot of cool spots along the way. Like I still love all of the big parks that we have that are accessible through the state park system or the metro park system. But there's just a lot of cool places all over Oregon and Washington to kind of check out if you're willing to explore a little more.
How long have you been doing this summer of swimming?
This will be year 8, I think. 8 or 9.
Wow.
8. Yeah.
So I imagine in those years you must have found a lot of different places to swim.
Correct. The part of what's really fun about it is the challenge that I pose to myself is I'm not allowed to repeat any place more than once a summer. I can swim there all I want, but I can only count it one time. And so it really encourages you anytime I travel, especially during the summer, to a different part of the state or the country, it really forces me to find a place to swim, oftentimes in a place that like I would never think to seek out, a river or a lake or something like that. And so it's led to kind of a lot of very fun adventures in some odd places outside of the Pacific Northwest, of like trying to find a place to go. And then even within Oregon, like I don't spend a ton of time in Southern Oregon or like super, super far east. And whenever I am in a place that I don't think I'm going to find myself back in the next couple of weeks, I'm like, gotta find a place to swim.
And this like self project that you've got, what are like the bounds of it? Like what are the rules you've set for yourself?
Well, I'm just going to remind anyone who might be listening, there are no real rules. This is all 100% made up. So, I've had friends over the years who have also done it, and they kind of make up their own rules or define it in their own way. And that's great. The way I like to do it is I start technically the season, if we want to call it that. It's Memorial Day to Labor Day. And I have to swim outside in a naturally occurring body of water. But I mean, like I swim in reservoirs and things like that. I really just mean no swimming pools, at least once a week. And I can only count each location once during that time. So by the end of the summer, I end up with like 15 or 16, depending on the year, different swim spots. And my personal rule with that is that I have to, if I'm not going to like stay in the water for an extended period of time and actually swim, I have to at least fully submerge my head 3 times in that water, which sometimes is easy. Like right now it's been quite warm, but often this is the time of year where we say summer swimming isn't really fun. It's just kind of like something you have to make yourself do when it's like, 60 degrees and raining in June sometimes. So sometimes it's not always the most enjoyable experience, but you do get outside and do get to have some fun.
I want to get into some of these swim spots in particular, because I'm sure folks who are listening to this and are like, oh, wow, this is right up my alley. The next question is like, where do you go? What are the spots? And I do recognize that maybe you don't want to talk about all of your spots. And frankly, we don't have the time to talk about 15 or 16 or 20 or 30 spots. But I understand that you've sort of narrowed it down to a few highlights just to sort of talk about today. So why don't we sort of start with places that are kind of in or around the Portland area?
So I grew up in Massachusetts, and yes, we have bodies of water there, but like nowhere near the kind of access we have in Oregon. And so I always just think it's incredible that like I can think of off the top of my head at least a dozen different places I could go swim that are all wonderful within a 30-minute-ish drive of my house. And a lot of them are places that I'm sure people already know about, but like my absolute favorite probably will always be Rooster Rock. It is, I think, easily one of the most stunningly beautiful places anywhere in the world, ? I love it there. You have a beautiful view of the gorge. You have wonderful sandy beaches. You also get plenty of shade during at least parts of the summer from the trees there. And there's obviously a clothing optional area, but if that's not as much your jam, there's also another portion of the beach where people are wearing swimsuits, and they're both equally as beautiful. So I absolutely love Rooster Rock, and that's really only about a 30-minute drive for most people out of Portland. Another place that I think is wonderful that's within the city is the Selwood Park. That's always kind of a really fun vibe and energy in the summer. There's tons of people, beautiful sandy beach, again, tons of shade if that's more your thing. I will say swimming in the Willamette this time of year, sometimes you got to always look at the algae reports before you go in
God,
there.
yeah.
And I think right now it's not super advisable, but always just check on the Willamette before you jump in. But typically Selwood is a really gorgeous place to go as well, that I think is super accessible for most people given how close it is. And then there's
And
also a
those
handful
algae
of
reports are posted online, right? Those algae reports you're
Yeah.
talking about?
Yeah. I don't. There's probably like an actual website that you can find that
I
information
do think if
from
you
the city.
essentially Google Willamette River algae report, I believe something comes up like that. But
Yeah,
it's,
they
it's,
they
I'm gonna say
update
it's
it
the
relatively frequently in the summer. My personal rule of thumb is I tend to not swim in the Willamette past like early to mid-July because the algae bloom starts to get pretty crazy. But I think this year they've had some like issues with like cryptosporidium or something a little early. I know we've had some things. So yeah, just always check out the algae report for the Willamette before you go. But the Columbia is always a safer bet in my opinion. Bigger river.
And some of these spots you mentioned, so Rooster Rock, I know that's like, obviously a big parking lot. There's restrooms there. It's, I think now a $10 day use parking fee unless you have a state park pass. What I wonder, as you're sort of going through some of these, like what I wonder if you could sort of add sort of what the access is like, if there's any fees there, if there's any amenities. Because no, not every swimming place is made equally, right? Some have great amenities, some are like nothing.
Yeah, so obviously any of the ones that are part of the state parks, so a lot of great ones, Rooster Rock, Oxbow, Dabney, if you have a state park pass, that then, parking there is included with that. If not, I believe it is a $10 fee at most of those places. I would highly recommend to anyone who spends a lot of time at the river in the summer that a state park pass is a great investment. I believe it's $50 now, $60. So if you're going once every couple of weeks, it really pays off itself pretty quickly. Those do all have bathrooms and really good parking areas. If you want to go a little bit more off the beaten track to some of the locations like along the Sandy, which I really love, there's typically no parking other than just pulling off on the side of the road, which is okay, but there's usually only a handful of spots there. So those are the kinds of places you would need to get to incredibly early in the day on a super hot day. And then also typically those places, it's a bit of a hike in. Not all of them are super long, but some of them involve like some technical climbs down a hill, or some of them are a couple of miles. So if you're looking for something that's just closer and easier to access from a parking lot, I would recommend going to one of the state parks or the metro parks. But if you're willing to walk a little further, I honestly think anytime you just want to drive along some of the major rivers in the area and you see a bunch of cars stopped on the side of the road, odds are there's a path down to the river there, and you can find a lot of nice spots from there. But those will not have any bathrooms or anything like that. So.
And what other areas, I guess, are kind of ripe with swimming opportunities? Because I feel like the gorge is definitely going to be a hot spot.
Yeah, the gorge gets super busy in the summer, obviously. The Sandy River also gets quite packed, but the further down you go, obviously, the fewer people make it further and further down the road. So you can find a lot of spots that get quieter and are a little more foresty and a little less beachy, which I feel like Rooster Rock really feels like a beach to me. But there's also a lot of great places up. Obviously, Savi's has a couple of really great beaches. It's not just the main one at the end of the road people think of. There's a lot of great beaches all along the way that you can find there. But I would also say that, if you want to get a little bit further outside of the city and you have a couple of hours, there's a ton of amazing lakes all in and around the National Forest. So I love Timothy Lake when I have a couple of hours to spend. That is only about hour and a half to 2 hours drive, and it's an absolutely stunning lake. Tons of boating, tons of parking, always a lot of people, but there's a lot of private little beaches all along the shore that you can find there, and that's really beautiful as well. I also would encourage people to not write off just driving over to the Washington side of the Columbia River as well. I think there's a lot of great beaches on the Oregon side, but the Washington side also has a lot of really nice beaches that I just often only remember when I'm sitting on the Oregon side and I look over and I see other people sitting on a beach on the other side. Wintler Community Park is one that's actually just kind of right over some of the major bridges there in Vancouver. That's pretty nice. If you're familiar with Broughton Beach here in Portland, which is part of the Metro Park system, Wintler is kind of like right on the other side of the river from there. And it's a nice little sandy beach that rarely gets as crowded as some of the ones over here in Portland if you're looking for a nice spot but don't really want to deal with all of the people.
I love how you're just like name dropping beach after beach after beach after beach. It just, I know you said at the top you're not an expert, but like, I mean, clearly you are.
I will say I'm cheating a little because in order to keep track every single year to make sure that I have not repeated a location, I have a list of every single location that I've swam at for the entire summer going back. I didn't start keeping track, I think, until 2020. The first 2 years, I just kind of went for it. But now I have like a detailed list of every single week. So I have like a lot of places to pull from on the list. But yeah.
You gotta have a list.
Gotta have a list. Some of them are names of places that I've made up because there is no name, but I know what they mean, so.
And a lot of these places sound like they're pretty beachy. You have a lot of space for people and a little bit better access. Are there any places that are some of your favorites that are like, you're kind of, you have to hike to get there? It's just like a creek and there's not really much sand or anything. Because I feel like little waterfall areas on rivers I particularly love. So I want to hear if you have any recommendations in that vein.
I will say, not to make it all about the Sandy River, but I love the Sandy River. It's called the Sandy for a reason. Has a sandy bottom. There's usually some nice little sandy spots, but it does have more of that wooded vibe. And then off of the river, there's a lot of little creeks that kind of like split at parts in the river and then meet back up with it. And if you're willing to kind of go out further and do a little exploration, there are tons and tons of trails that will lead down to some of these creeks. Most of them are actually a part of a lot of those parks like Oxbow or Dabney or Dodge. They're just not a part of that main parking area. So like you might see signs somewhere that says like it's, you know, a part of the park, but you're not actually in it. So they don't require the parking passes because you're just on the side of the road. But if you're willing to kind of just go down some of those trails and explore a little bit, there are quite a few just kind of like smaller creeks that go off of the main river. And a lot of those are more kind of like private little beaches where if you go all the way down there, it might turn out that there's already a party of people there and that there isn't. If they don't want to share, then there might not be room for you. But if you kind of want to walk around a little bit, you can almost always find something. And that's something I think about a lot, is that we have so many places to swim here that even on the absolute hottest days when everyone's at the river, if you really want to just like have a private little beach to yourself, there's always one somewhere. You might just have to work a little harder to find it.
I've heard some good things about the Washougal River in Washington. I know a lot of folks who like sort of that, I think kind of what Kiara was talking about, something like sort of waterfall-y little falls, maybe more of a swimming hole vibe. What do you know about the Washougal River spots?
I really like the Washougal. I don't go there as much just because it is a little bit further than the Sandy, for me at least, where I live. I will also say I typically find that the Washougal is colder than the Sandy River, which some people don't mind, but that's not always ideal for a lot of folks. And then also, I think there's a lot of great swimming holes along the Washougal that I would highly, highly recommend you go to if you have time during the weekdays. Because a lot of those swimming holes get super crowded on the weekends. Like Dugan Falls is absolutely gorgeous. Naked Falls is really beautiful. But those places tend to get pretty crowded on the weekends and it doesn't really let up. But most of those spots are pretty empty if you want to go on like a Tuesday morning, a Tuesday afternoon, if you have time off or you work in the evenings. Those places are really great to explore on weekdays, or honestly, a lot of times on holiday weekends when everything kind of clears out in the Portland area, people are camping and such. You can find a lot of great spots that open up a little more. I really like the Washougal. It tends to be a little bit colder than a lot of other rivers in my experience, and it also has a pretty strong current in certain areas. So I would just also be careful of that depending on where you go. But most of the swimming hole areas obviously don't have as much of a current, so those are pretty good to swim in. I'm trying to find. I think there's a place that doesn't really have a name that, or maybe it does, and I just gave it a weird name on the Washougal that I never remember the name of. I think I called it like Big Eddie or something like that. I don't think that's the real name, but I think it was like a Big Eddie that I was like, this is called Big Eddie now, right?
We've kind of gotten out to Washington a little bit. Are there any other places in Oregon or even in Washington that you've gone to that have really stood out to you?
I will be honest that my all-time favorite spot is a place that's just on the Sandy River. And it will forever and always be my favorite swimming spot. It's just kind of like a perfect little beach oasis that no one's ever there. Also, just to follow up, it turns out there is a place on the Washougal called Big Eddie. And it is very nice. Yeah.
I love a descriptive name like that.
Yeah, Big Eddie Greenway, and there is a place to go swimming there. This might be a cheat of an answer, but I don't believe this area is open at this point, because I know a lot of it got burnt in the fires a couple of years ago. But the Blue Pool out, I think that's near like the Mackenzie River, that is incredibly stunning. I will say that is some of the coldest water I've ever gone swimming in, ocean included. It's absolutely frigid, like body-numbingly so. Yeah, we should probably check if it's even accessible now, but I'm sure it will be in a few years.
I will say that the Forest Service has, I don't know if they at one point considered banning swimming at Blue Pool.
I mean, honestly,
because too many people were being seriously injured from either jumping from the cliffs into the pool, which is not great, or the water was just too cold. So I do know that that's an area that officials are telling people not to swim. But it's a beautiful spot to hike and to look at.
It is gorgeous, and I do kind of get that because that water is insanely cold, and that comes from someone who likes cold water. But that's like pretty rough. There is also a wonderful beach. There's Dodge Park, which is not that far from Oregon, and I know a lot of people already go there. But there is a really nice spot if you're willing to kind of continue hiking out from there. That's just like another beach, probably 20-minute hike from the parking area. It's not a challenging hike, but I know not everyone wants to go that far, especially with coolers and stuff. But if you're willing to kind of make the trek, there is a really beautiful beach that's not too far from that parking area. It has a lot of it has one faster area that has like a strong current that kind of goes over some rocks that everyone like takes their inner tubes down and stuff. It's kind of fun. And there's like another little beach on the other side of the river that you can swim to. And it's kind of, in my opinion, it's kind of like the most picturesque little like traditional Oregon river spot. And it's really, really gorgeous. And that can also get kind of full sometimes, but usually not that much. And I would say Timothy Lake is another favorite. You know, you have absolutely stunning views of Mount Hood. And the lake itself is just absolutely gorgeous, and the forest around it is lovely. And if you want to go and make a whole day of it, you can hike around the lake. It's like 14 miles, I think. Stop along the way, take a swim on one of the little beaches. It's really, really nice out there.
Hadley, what is it about swimming that you enjoy so much that leads you to do the summer swimming?
Man, I don't know. Maybe I'm just crazy. No, I think I absolutely love the sensation of being in water. I think it just like the feeling of floating and just kind of like being immersed in this thing. I find it very calming, very freeing. I also am someone who hates the heat. And so if it is above like 70 degrees outside, I immediately need to be in some body of water to cool off. Um, but I don't know. I've always just kind of loved being near the water, whether that's a beach or a river or a lake. I find it incredibly calming and soothing. I love the sound that it makes. And it's also just a ton of fun to be able to like find these places and have kind of a goal when you're outside, something to look for, something to search for. Um, yeah, I love swimming, guys, in case that wasn't obvious based on the last 30 minutes of talking.
Kiara, you're nodding along to all of that. I see.
Yeah, I'm also like, I so resonate with everything you said. As somebody who runs hot and lived in Texas for so long, I literally moved away from Texas to get away from the heat. Anytime it is above like 75, 80, I'm like, I have to get to some sort of beach, some sort of body of water. So I've been loving all this research. I'm going to go home and figure out what my next go-to spot is going to be, because it is, 91 degrees today. So
Oof.
Yeah, I will say I did name drop it very briefly, but I feel like a lot of people in Portland don't know about or sleep on Broughton Beach, which is out by the airport on Marine Drive, and that is one of the metro parks. But it is a beautiful beach, and it can get pretty poppin', but there's always tons of room because it's so large. So there's always plenty of room to spread out, and that's usually my go-to. Like, it's after work. I don't have a ton of time to make it somewhere, but in 10 minutes I can be on the river, on the beach, just enjoying the breeze. It's much nicer than my backyard.
yeah, that's actually one of my go-tos as well. That's one of the only beaches that I actually go to, because also you get to see the planes taking off on top of you, which is pretty cool as well. So I feel like you got a little bit of entertainment there if you bring someone who's into planes. So.
And don't sleep on the sunsets there either. The sunsets there are always very gorgeous with the view of the mountain.
Yeah, gosh. So, Hadley, I mean, you said you were raised in Massachusetts. Obviously, you've been singing the praises of Oregon swimming, but like, for folks who maybe have not done a lot of swimming in Oregon, how does it compare to some of the other places that you've been swimming in?
I will say, honestly, the thing that always stands out to me the most is how accessible it is here. As someone who grew up in the summer, either basically swimming in the ocean or a pool, the fact that you just kind of have all of these rivers and lakes and reservoirs and things all within, 30 minutes, an hour of you is kind of crazy to me. That there's just so many options that will kind of always stand out. And then when I travel anywhere and I'm trying to find somewhere to swim in that location, how often it can be such a struggle. Either it's because like there aren't really any accessible bodies of water, or there are bodies of water, but everyone tells me they're not clean enough to swim in. And so I never really take that for granted here, about how we not only have a ton of different options, but also how most of them are like these really beautiful, clean, pristine bodies of water that are safe to swim in. Growing up in Boston, we have a giant river that runs right through the city, and you're not allowed to go in it. So the fact that there's multiple rivers in the city that I can just jump in on a hot day, I'll never take for granted. But I also think, again, as someone who grew up on the East Coast, I'm really used to like a certain kind of beach. And so the idea of like a river beach versus a coastal beach was something that I wasn't really familiar with until I moved to Oregon. And more of the idea that like you can have a sandy beach, but it's in the woods and you have trees and not just like sand dunes. And I really kind of love that juxtaposition of being able to hike through a forest and then just kind of get popped out on this beautiful little sandy beach somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely love that too. I think that's such a cool, unique part about where we live. So I'm just glad that we have so many options. I feel feel like there's always a good place to find. So thank you for sharing some of your wisdom and your research with us. And just very quickly, could you remind us a little bit about the big safety tips that people should keep in mind, just to make sure we leave off with that?
Yeah, so obviously always think about a current before you go into any sort of river or ocean. If you're going to be swimming at the beach in the ocean this summer, they can be pretty strong and they can kind of grab you unexpectedly. So always be really careful and wade in slowly when you're going into anything with a current. Definitely know how strong of a swimmer you are and be honest with yourself about that. You know, if you're not a super strong swimmer, probably don't try to go into a big river that has a strong current or go out over your head. Really play it safe. Always take the temperature of the water into account. Some of these bodies of water, especially this time of year, are still quite cold. And that can be pretty shocking to your system, jumping in really quickly. And even if you are a strong swimmer, it can kind of leave you a little bit paralyzed for a minute as to what to do. And then lastly, just, always make sure if you're going out into the woods somewhere by yourself to find some of these cooler places, probably let someone know where you're going. Just, give friends a heads up. Same thing with hiking. This is when I'm leaving. This is when I'm expected back, etc.
All great advice, all great recommendations. Hadley, thank you so much for coming on today. Really appreciate you sharing all of your swimming wisdom and expertise with us.
Thanks, guys. Everyone get out there and swim.
Well, folks, that will do it for us for today. Until next time, you can watch our videos on the Oregonians YouTube channel and view all of our travel and outdoors coverage on OregonLive.com/travel, as well as HereIsOregon.com.
Please leave us a rating or review if you enjoy the show, and if you want to support this podcast as well as our local journalism, please consider a subscription to Oregon Live. You can find the details at OregonLive.com/subscribe. Also, if you're a fan of the show and you're interested in potentially sponsoring it, you can get in touch with our marketing people at advertise@oregonian.com. This episode of the show was produced by me alongside Jamie Hale and Vicky Connor.
Stay safe and happy travels, everyone. Until next time, we leave you with this 10 seconds of Zen.